Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Dipanjan, for broadening out the scope of this very important topic, the way ahead for education in India. I was at the World Bank debate day before yesterday. It was a live telecast of a very important debate called the EduTech debate, and the topic was most of the investments in technology in schools is wasted. It was an Oxford-style debate, and there were 6 participants, and I was one of them. And the other 5 participants were global leaders in education or global leaders in technology, including the lead education specialist of the World Bank, senior partner from PwC London, and Dr. Tim Kelly from Infodev, who has about 27 years of promoting education and technology behind him. And post that debate, one of the things that came up was India is a different ball game altogether. And I want to begin our short discourse this afternoon by talking about that. And the point is that entrepreneurial spirit in India is really far ahead in the Indians as compared to any other country in the world. And that's what will set Indian businessmen and Indian investors in education apart from what governments in different countries are willing to invest in. So I want to talk a little bit about an interesting report that I read, and then come back to this discussion about what's good, what's a good way forward for investing, especially as far as K-12 education is concerned. And I'm going to quote Tom Greaves, the chairman of the Greaves Group, and he describes the 3 major challenges facing education today. And the first challenge he calls is education hits the perfect storm. And he says the storm is the result of several things, including the world is changing rapidly. The amount of information available is doubling every 18 months. Technology is rapidly evolving. And the most important part, the dilemma is the world around us is changing, jobs are changing, and yet schools, where change is slow to happen, lags behind change. And the second challenge, according to Tom, is pressure for results are intensifying. And the third one, he says, finances have hit the cliff. We have to figure out how to do more with less. And the sense that I get out of not just our work in India, but initiating our work in Bangladesh, Nepal, to a large extent, not so much in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos, but intensively in all 16 African nations of the sub-Saharan region. And my sense is that there is, across all of this, one common dimension that comes across is that there is very little understanding of the dimension and the scope of the country that you are looking at. So 4 years back when Jesse started to work in Rwanda, we signed up as the ICT advisor to the government of Rwanda. And they're only concerned, despite 3 or 4 very strong meetings at the highest level with the president to introduce them to the various concepts of integrating ICTs into school education, resulted in only one thing, that they wanted to have someone who can rewrite the entire curriculum of the Rwandese schools based on ICT. So they wanted basically e-content development people. And that continues, of course, to be a very big major gap area in all of the African countries, whether it is Ghana, whether it is Burkina Faso, Zambia, Tanzania, where Jesse is just starting to work now, Ethiopia. All of these places really require enormous amounts of content development structures, content development entrepreneurs to come in and to look at their curriculum and to revitalize all of that through a multimedia mode. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we have very little understanding as governments trying to understand what we have to do. The point is that the governments are constantly pressurized. I mean, it's the flavor of the season that kind of gets the goat. and governments are pressurized to adopt technologies. Having said that, governments have several other things to deal with, and for whatever reasons, we find that governments have very little understanding of what's happening on the ground, and very little understanding of how to listen to the voices from the ground, how to put your ear to the ground and respond to whatever is the question of the day. And perhaps that is really one of the reasons why Tom says that everything is changing, but schools are behind, lagging behind change itself. So, change is the last to arrive in schools. And not to mention the extreme reluctance to actually undertake any of those changes that even they individually might think is worth their while or worth for the country. The second important thing is that there is a lot of lip service around the world, especially in the developing world, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, Southeast Asia, including India. There's a lot of lip service about the role of technology. But if you really dig down under, the point that you find is there is very little actual understanding of what technologies can do. What is the role that technologies can play? What are the structures that are required before you can even put technologies into place? And then at the end of all of that, how do you actually monitor the role that technology has to play in achieving certain outcomes? In India, we have found that there is lack of even defining your own educational objectives. So you have some national objectives which have to be fulfilled and all of that. But in terms of really understanding what does this country need in terms of education, where are these 290 million children and the other 170 out-of-school children headed for, there is really very, very little understanding of that. And so, one of the things that is difficult to comprehend is that there is a large-scale investment because somebody feels that this is a great thing to do. And also because there is a lot of push from the private sector and the NGO sector, which are promoting certain technologies. Governments buy into them, but governments don't really buy into them. So they adopt something, but they will not go the full measure. And so this patchwork actually ultimately results in a half-hearted attempt. And therefore, the outcomes that were actually predicted at the beginning of that particular project never come up. And you find a lackluster, some vague outcome of this whole process. And in the end, what we hear is that India is the dumping yard for pilot programs, or India is the dumping yard for e-content development. So we bear that dubious distinction primarily because we do not have a complete understanding of how to harness, how to utilize all of these wonderful technology bits. The other thing that is really required, I suppose, is putting measurable, accountable systems which should give you short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. And some of the things that Jesse has understood over the last several years of its work with ministries of education in some of the most difficult developing countries around the world is that it's not really possible to put up a pilot project, run it with a few hundred schools or with a few 30, 40 schools, and then hope to take it to scale with 2,500 schools or with 1 million schools. The complete structure, the ethos, the development methodology for a pilot project versus a large-scale, replicable, scalable, measurable, sustainable model are two completely different things. So if you're doing a pilot, that's just to show the efficacy of a particular product or a particular technology. But if you want to take that to scale, you really have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. So I think we really need to make that distinction, and it's time for us to kind of really put our foot down and say we are not open to any more pilot projects, because I think enough has been demonstrated, and with whatever there is time to now start to implement actual change. And finally, what I really think is important for all of these countries whether it is sub-Saharan Africa, where I think there is tremendous scope for this particular point, and this is public-private partnership or multi-stakeholder partnerships in education. Sometime back in the Asia region, there used to be the GKP, or the Global Knowledge Partnership, which tried very hard to promote the role of multi-stakeholder partnerships in education. And there was a lot of awareness building through that platform. And I think some of the very interesting aspects that have come out have been captured by Alexandra Draxler in her book, Using Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships in Education. I think there is need for governments. Again, there is a lot of lip service about that and say, okay, we will use the PPP mode, or we will use, but most governments actually tend to relegate back to using the private sector as a service provider, and they think that it's really provision of service from the private sector in lieu of certain fees. But that has to change if public-private partnership in education or multi-stakeholder partnerships in education have to really kind of take root and provide the benefits that such a mechanism, such a partnership should provide, would be able to provide. I think it's important to understand that these are two equal partners in this particular project, and that both of them have the ownership of making sure that this project works well. So it's very important for both of them to be to have the ownership and to be accountable for that particular project. So what are the things that we can do? And my sense is that there is need, and I use every platform that I can to actually talk about this, and I must confess that there has been very little success in getting the government to kind of come to terms with this, is the need for a national vision. I think as a country, we need to have a national vision. I'm surprised at Rwanda, at Ghana, at countries like Zambia. They already have a national vision in place. I was talking to somebody yesterday evening, and Nepal has its own master plan ready. Compare that with a country like India, and we don't have a master plan. So what happens is that we don't really know which way we are going. And because we don't know which way we are going, so anything and everything is fine. So what really, I mean, from a completely India perspective, solely India perspective, I think a national vision is very, very important. We need to have a national vision with regard to education. We need to have a national vision with regard to using ICTs in education, with regard to vocational education, whatever. But we need to have a national vision of what we want the 300-odd million students in school today to do when they come out of school, and what is it that we are providing, what is the platforms, forums that we are providing for them to enter the workforce. I think that is absolutely critical. And the other thing that I really want to talk about is monitoring and evaluation tools, or standards and benchmarks, which are very, very important. So if you have a PPP model, or if you have a multi-stakeholder partnership model, it's absolutely easy for any one of them to slide out and say, well, we did not encounter the kind of conducive environments that we were promised, or we did not expect these challenges, or we did not know what to achieve. And so I think it's absolutely critical to put benchmarks and standards which are not just national, which can be which are global, and these benchmarks already exist. UNESCO has competency standards for teachers, for schools, for students, and for content that can be used in schools. And in India, we refuse to take them. The OECD developed the PISA test. The UK government developed the TIMSS. In India, we don't use any of that. So how do we benchmark ourselves against a global framework? How do we benchmark ourselves against a global forum? And so how do our students actually go out and compete against a global diaspora? So that's about the India part. But I think importantly, and I was just sharing with Ravi a few minutes back, the moment you step out of the airport at Accra in Ghana, from the Accra airport till the city of Accra, you have signboards of three major organizations. One is Fair and Lovely, The other one is, yeah, it's Fair and Lovely. And